Hi guys, it's Kamil here, and I'm here with the second of two lists I film every single year. Today we're going to talk about the top 10 favorite novels I've read in 2019. The non-fiction list is up for a couple of days already, and if you are interested in that type of literature too, I will link the video up and down in the box below. But today it's fiction time, baby, so grab a coffee or tea, as this video might be a bit longer. What's important, in contrast to the non-fiction list, where I had books published across the years, the fiction list, the today list, is in majority built up of books released in 2019. Out of 11 books I have on the list, 5 books were not published in 2019, but I will do us all a disservice if those were excluded. I read them this year, they were fantastic, and they're on the list. At the end of the day, this is not Booker Award or Pulitzer. We don't have to follow the rules. Yes, that's exactly right. Thank you, Alessia. And yes, you heard it right, I did say 11 books. You'll see why very soon. Okay, with no further chit-chat, let's get into it, okay? Number 10, The Water Dancer by Ta-Nhisi Coates, a debut novel in form of an innovative slavery narration from one of the most acclaimed Afro-American socio-political writers. Coates drew his inspiration from historical accounts of the Underground Railroad, African folklore, but what's probably the most visible from big Afro-American writers like Toni Morrison, Octavia Butler, and Colson Whitehead. The latter two are especially prominent in the fantastical elements of The Water Dancer. You know, me myself, I'm not a huge fan of mixing history with magical realism. I didn't love Colson Whitehead, The Underground Railroad. But somehow Ta-Nhisi Coates managed to blend those supposedly contradictory elements well. Actually so well that both felt grounded, and the magical realism created, to say the least, a sort of poetic angle to the narration. Number 9. The Years by Annie Ernaux, a journalistic account of the second half of the 20th century with truly sociologic ambition, yet wrapped in a poetic prose. Annie Ernaux, through the life of a female protagonist, tells the story of shifts and changes that shape the way we live today in Western society. To tell that story, Ernaux uses first-person plural narration, giving it almost an oral narration quality. I believe the last time I saw the first-person plural matching so well the novel it's used in was when I was reading On Such a Full Sea by Chang Li. Although probably the most well-known novel using the first-person plural is Virgin Suicide by Jeffrey Eugenides, which is also the only Eugenides novel I really liked. Number 8. On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. I didn't expect to like this novel, being honest. I thought it's going to be a pretentious, self-absorbed tearjerker, and I was very, very wrong. It's not pretentious. The way Ocean Vuong uses language, also in his interviews, is beautifully eloquent. The motives, the mother-son relationship, the discovering of own sexuality and breaking away from the opioid-addicted surroundings were handled so skillfully that there wasn't a single moment where I was rolling my eyes thinking, Jesus, just get on with it, as I generally do when things are too sentimental. Stunning work, and when one realizes that voice only 31 years old, it's pretty mind-blowing. Number 7. The ThreeBody Problem by Cixin Liu. Ursula K. Le Guin once said that Science fiction, properly conceived, like all serious fiction, however funny, is a way of trying to describe what is in fact going on, what people actually do and feel, how people relate to everything else in this vast sack, this belly of the universe, this womb of things to be and tomb of things that were, this unending story. Best science fiction, as well as non-fiction, provides commentary on our current day and age and describes how our society might develop because of its quirks and faults, as well as its dreams and fantasies. Cixin Liu in the ThreeBody Problem, the first Asian novel ever to win Hugo Award, mixes Chinese history and culture with the history of science to create meditation of the way we humans might act when faced with the problem of extraterrestrial, much more advanced civilization, intentions of which are not necessarily peaceful. In the second volume of the trilogy that I also read, he ponders upon the laws that might rule the multi-civilizational universe. All of those philosophical and scientific theories are packed in a hard-to-put-down, action, crazy galactic adventure. Brilliant, mind-blowing in terms of its philosophical as well as narrative scope. Strongly recommended. Number 6. Mentioned already Colson Whitehead, but this time with his 2019 novel The Nika Boys, a brutal account of a life in a juvenile reformatory called the Nika Academy. Colson Whitehead in The Nika Boys fictionalized the history of a Jim Crow-era juvenile prison in Florida that in real life was called Florida School for Boys. The school had been running for 110 years until it was closed in 2011, surrounded by the accusation of rape, abuse, and all horrors you can imagine, caused both by guards and inmates. In 50s and 60s, it was one of the biggest reformatory institutions in the USA. However, as history teaches us, in a segregated society, here, the USA in 50s and 60s, when one race is treated as lesser than other, the violence and barbarism against that group of people are the elements of everyday life. More so in those type of institutions that tend to change in chambers of macabre of sort. You can expect nothing different from Colson Whitehead's brilliant novel, which is uprooting the dark history of that place. But what I loved here is the fact that Whitehead offers hope. Not a simple one, obviously, as there is no straight path from a hellish place like Nika Academy, but nonetheless, hope it is. Number 5. Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli. I'm a bit biased to political books, so I want to put it out there before I start talking about Luiselli's The Lost Children Archive. Furthermore, if you yourself read books mostly for escapism, to forget about the mess we are living in, this might not be your cup of tea, as Luiselli addresses the very pressing topic of migration, here specifically the children migration. Luiselli wrote what critics like to call an autofiction, where in the fictionalized autobiography she recalls a journey with her partner and 2 young kids to the border of Mexico, in an attempt to find and rescue 2 girls smuggled through the border and now potentially held in one of children detention centers. As you probably figured out, it's a story building on the juxtaposition of being on one side, the American side of the border, and the other side, the Mexican side, and how that affects people, especially kids separated from their families. What I loved the most, though, was the way Luiselli mercilessly debunked the political newspeak. Number 4. Season of Migration to the North by Tayeb Salih. Probably the most well-known Sudanese novel and a classic post-colonial narration. We follow a brilliant Sudanese child prodigy, observing how he transfers into a well-groomed, educated in London young man, who, fueled by hatred and self-hatred too, conquers and destroys Western women fascinated with Orientalism and treating him as a token of Orientalism. This is probably one of the most praised Arabic novels by critics dealing with Arabic literature. While I found it dark, moving, passionately describing mad society overtaken by hateful ideology that recreates itself in reverse in the main protagonist of Tayeb Salih novel. I thought it was brilliant. Number 3, The Ministry of Atmos Happiness by Arundhati Roy. This is Arundhati Roy's second ever published novel. Roy, the winner of Booker Prize for The God of Small Things in 1997, made us wait 20 years for her second book. In 1997, when Roy received her Man Booker Prize, it was the first award ever given to an Indian who actually lived in India, and the first award ever given to any Indian woman, be it Indian or expatriate. Then The God of Small Things sold more than 6 million copies. Therefore, we can say that we have a bit of a Donna Tartt situation here, with Roy publishing so rarely but so successfully. But in case of Roy, it's very clear what she does in between writing those novels. Since publishing The God of Small Things, Roy has not stayed away from politics. She became a very vocal pro-democracy activist in India, one that not only publishes non-fiction works, but also doesn't shy away from putting herself on the front lines of various movements protecting uncountable minority groups India is the home of. With the Ministry of Atmos Happiness, she does nothing different. In this ambitious novel that, in contrast to The God of Small Things, she takes upon telling the history of India in the grand scale, starting from an individual fight of a hijra for own place in this enormous yet very crowded and religious-driven country, to the nation fight for its independence when telling the story of Muslims in Kashmir. Arundhati Roy is an ambitious writer. She aims at creating unusual narrations. The God of Small Things was constructed with a sort of circular narration, unwinding the plot slowly and like a circle, jumping back and forth between moments of linear time. Here in the Ministry of Atmos Happiness, non-chronological aspect of narration is nothing surprising, but what's new is the variety of narratives, not only when it comes to characters, but also in the form of various narrative voices and devices. We have common third-person voices, but also epistolary voices, testimonies of prisoners, various governments and juridical acts, and more. This novel is additionally so packed with metaphors and references, political and social, that one could spend days deciphering it and even longer discussing it. The only shame is that such a brilliant writer writes so rarely, but maybe great novels take that much time to write. You know, early this year I had spent 3 months in Egypt acting as a finance director for the local branch of the corporation I work for. And as much as time allowed, and there was very little of it, but as much as I could, I dived into Egyptian literature. Not everything was great, but there were 2 phenomenal books. This is one of them. Number 2, Beer in the Snooker Club by Waguih Ghali. This is a very Egyptian novel, but also it isn't. On one hand, it describes a very turbulent period of Egyptian history when Farouk, a puppet king supported by the British, was overthrown by Gamal Abdel Nasser. On the other hand, it's a story of alienation, migration between traditions and cultures, that focuses mostly on Coptic and Jewish protagonists. You know, now quite marginal for the Muslim country Egypt is nowadays. The main character belongs to the impoverished arm of Egyptian elite, educated in London, comes back to the country that is radicalizing religiously, and he himself, being a Coptic Christian, cannot seem to find a sense of belonging there. Neither in the superficial relations of fading on the political scene rich class his family belongs to, nor in the country that is growing more estranged from the Western canon he was educated in. Ironically, the West is also rejecting him, as he as a Coptic Christian not belonging to the ruling Muslim class cannot dream about British visa. There's a love story too, of course, the love to Jewish Egyptian, as torn and fascinating character as he himself. The author of the Beer in the Snooker Club, Waguih Ghali, written only one book, this one, and a few years later he committed suicide in London. This gets us to the number one, and traditionally already, I have two books here. One published in 2019 and a modern classic. I know that after Booker, having the number one shirt is hugely controversial. But I was doing that for the last 2 years, so this is not me being badly influenced. This year's number one, the best book I've read in 2019, goes to, surprisingly, Duck's Newburyport by Lucy Ellmann. The most impactful, innovative, yet absolute joy to read of a novel. A novel I had the pleasure to spend weeks with in 2019. This is the book that I believe will be part of a future canon, and one I talked in depth about in my video reviews that I will link up above and down in the box below. I will dive now into a bit of shameless self-promotion, and I hope you will forgive me for it, because this is not an everyday event. Lucy Ellmann herself tweeted about my video on her Twitter account. I was shocked, obviously positively, and very happy. Still, I have no idea how she became aware of it. And I won't repeat myself here, as the review I recorded on Ducks is the one I'm the proudest of. So it would mean a lot if you watched it. I will just say that if you want to read a book that gives testimony to the most vital elements of our modern Western life, good and bad, mostly bad, and showcases it from the perspective of an average American family, this is the book to read. If you want to read just one book from 2019, this is the book to read. And don't be scared with its size and a stream of consciousness narration. It really is quite accessible. Now, I said two books, and to continue the tradition of praising one classic, modern classic I've read, in 2019, Ducks Newburyport shares the number one with Nawal El-Saadawi's novel. Nawal El-Saadawi created a sacrilegious almost portrait of a woman in a patriarchal society, who, to build for herself the oasis of freedom, chooses a life of a prostitute. The inspiration for this novel came where Saadawi worked on her academic publication, Woman and Neurosis in Egypt, and was interviewing female prisoners in Cairo, and came across a woman who was waiting for a death penalty for killing a man. This novel is a fictionalized account of the testimony of that woman. The novel was rejected in Egypt and published in Lebanon, but later on it was translated to over 20 languages. This is brutal, yet oddly empowering novel that sometimes feels like a punch in the gut. However, it's somehow weirdly hopeful. Al-Saadawi was being criticized in Egypt for perpetuating the stereotypes of male-female dynamics in Arab societies, and therefore flattering the views of Western readers, while coming short supposedly on the front of literary merits. But this type of criticism, in my opinion, is the easiest to come up with, to trivialize the work of a woman that spent time in the same prison as the character of her novel, for releasing a feminist magazine called Confrontations. Okay guys, that's it. Another year behind us and another to look forward to. Let me know what was the favorite book you read in 2019. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my choices, if you read any of those. And I talk to you soon. Have a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant 2020. Bye bye, guys.